Operation to be held on September 28th at 8:30 a.m. at the East Mezzanine of City Hall, 72 West College Avenue, San Angelo, Texas, for the purpose of considering the following agenda items. One, we'll call the meeting to order. It is 8:30. And Director Barrio, will you lead us in prayer?
I will. If you would bow with me. There we go. I have a microphone now. If you would bow with me. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to live in this fine city of San Angelo, Texas. As we conduct the business of the City of San Angelo Development Corporation, we ask your guidance, we ask your blessing. Let us be good stewards of the half-cent sales tax. Let us use it wisely to the furtherance of this community's economic situation. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We'll open it up to public comment. Issues or items that are not on the agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium, begin by stating their name, and limit remarks to less than 3 minutes. Board members may request that a discussed item be placed on a future agenda. The board takes public comment on all regular agenda items during the discussion of those items. Do we have any public comment?
Good morning, board. Thank you for allowing us to be here this morning. My name is Elizabeth Dantzler, and I am one of the student assistants for the ASU Small Business Development Center. So Dave Erickson asked me to come and introduce our brand new graduate student this morning, Emma Underwood. And then a little bit of background about what the students do. So we start off in a behind-the-scenes kind of situation, and we kind of learn to work with the community and all the businesses here in San Angelo. And then as we grow into the internship and student assistantship, then we start taking on a more public scene. So I am the student lead for the business plan competition. And then I am also the student lead for the Meet the Lender Luncheon. So I'm very excited to bring those to San Angelo and just further my professional development. So I'd like to introduce Emma Underwood.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emma Underwood. I'm super happy to be here and to get to introduce myself. So I'm the new graduate assistant at the SBDC. I'm getting my MBA currently, and I plan on graduating in May of 2023. I'm from San Angelo. I went to ASU and graduated with a political science and history degree. I was very active in student government. I served on the executive board, I guess, for student government. I was a secretary. I was also a Young Life leader, and I also served on the Political Science Association. So this is kind of a new realm for me, the business world, since I was a political science student, but I'm super excited to be here, and I'm very excited for this opportunity to learn and gain some experience and see how San Angelo works in the business world. So thank you.
All right. Well, welcome aboard, Emma, and thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. Do we have any other public comment?
Max, I'd like to address the board, if I could. I've got a letter of resignation that I would like to read now to the board. Dear Max, it is with regret that I tender my resignation from the City of San Angelo Development Corporation Board of Directors effective immediately. The reason for this sudden resignation is a result of a recent City of San Angelo Ordinance 2022-040 outlining conflict of interest that was adopted and made official on May 17, 2022. The ordinance reads as Section 1, that Chapter 2, Article 2.07, Division 1, Section 2.07.001, Number 5, Conflict of Interest, is hereby amended to read as follows. Number 5, Conflict of Interest. Letter C, none of the following persons or entities shall be eligible for a grant or assistance from any board during his or her tenure or for 6 months thereafter, nor shall they have received a grant or assistance in the 6 months prior to their tenure. Number 3, a legal entity owned by or under the control of a board member or for which the board member serves as an officer or director. The entity of which I am a board member is the San Angelo Chamber of Commerce. Because the Chamber receives funding from the City of San Angelo Development Corporation, I have been advised that this creates a legal conflict under the City's conflict of interest. To prevent any issues or delays with the upcoming Chamber contract with the City of San Angelo Development Corporation, I believe it is in the best interest of both parties to step down as a board member of the City of San Angelo Development Corporation so that the contract negotiations with the San Angelo Chamber of Commerce can continue and be finalized prior to its current expiration in December of 2022. I am grateful for having had the opportunity to serve on the board of this fine organization for the past 12 months and I offer my best wishes for its continued success.
All right. Director Evett, we're sorry to hear that, but we completely understand.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for serving, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have any other public comment? If not, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Items A, consider approving the necessary corporation disbursements. B, consider approving the August 24, 2022 meeting minutes. C, consider approving the August 2022 financials. And D, consider approving an increase from $5,000 to $15,000 under the Affordable Housing Assistance Program and authorizing the board president or their designee to execute all necessary documents. Do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, we have first by Director Barrio. Do we have a second? Okay, second by Director Gomez. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to number 5, the regular agenda. A, discussion and possible action regarding the administrative services agreement by and between the City of San Angelo Development Corporation and the City of San Angelo. Presentation by Vice President John Barrio.
Thank you very much. With regard to the regular agenda, item A, I'd like to say that what you're about to experience is how open government is supposed to work in Texas, with transparency. Under the Open Meetings Act, this board could not discuss this very important contract in any way with any more than just 3 members without being an open meeting. Therefore, we are here today where the board as a whole, we meet as a quorum. A minimum quorum is 4. We have that. So that it can conduct business legally and without any hidden planning or impropriety. Okay. There may, in the course of this first agenda item, be some or even much information that goes along with other agenda items on today's schedule. And I'll also point out that technically by our bylaws, these are not agenda items. What the bylaws specify are that they are issues. It may sound like a simple difference, but bear that in mind as we go through this agenda. So with that, issue 5A is the consideration of the Administrative Services Agreement, but we're following with this COSA DC disbursement policy, appointments to various boards, the Bylaws Review Committee, and they are issues that I am particularly involved in and will be speaking today in part. But then later we also have the Professional Services Agreement, and I'm skipping around, but the an economic development position search process. This is all involved. And because this is all so interconnected, it's difficult to separate the discussion. I think in a large way, we're going to be talking about things in the future agenda issues that will have already been covered. So I encourage everyone to listen to and bear in mind each agenda item, because we'll all get an education this morning. This isn't just a discussion of the board. This is for the information and dissemination of that information to the public. That is why it's a Texas public open meeting. So with that, a brief synopsis of what the corporation is. A lot of folks perceive this corporation to be a board and department of the city of San Angelo. In reality, the Texas Local Government Code that establishes the ability for a city to create an economic development corporation establishes that the city council can elect to create the corporation, or a vote of the citizens can create the corporation. The next step in the interweaving of this corporation with our city and city government is that once established, the city council, a board of 7 individuals acting together as a single voice, get to install officers for this corporation. That as our city performs, each council member, which includes the 6 council people elected by the city of San Angelo, by their respective districts, and then the mayor, but they all have an equal voice in this. So once the corporation is established, the city council elects that each of the 7 gets to appoint 1 member of this board of directors. But it's not really an appointment. They merely get to nominate the board members. Once the nomination is made, it is the full vote of the council that installs us. And they also have the legal provision that they can also remove us. But we must remember, it's not the voice of a single council person. It is the voice of the entire council that causes changes in this panel. The next point where the corporation and the city come together is in the budget process. Anything that we vote on as a corporation must be ratified by the city as a project or as an annual budget item. And there can be amendments through the year to that budget cycle. So the next place where there's interaction is that if this board really screws up, the council can terminate the corporation, which would be catastrophic toward the half-cent sales tax and the benefits the city derives from it. So with that said, talking about the actual contract between the city of San Angelo for administrative services and the corporation known as COSA DC, the City of San Angelo Development Corporation. One of the provisions in that current contract is that it automatically renews annually. That date is coming up the end of this month. And here we are on the 28th of September. And until recently, no one on this whole process has questioned the automatic renewal. I found that personally very disturbing. This is a very significant contract in the neighborhood of $700,000 a year that this corporation pays to the city of San Angelo for the support services. So I placed it on the agenda, and here we are today to talk about that. We've had a recent change in the staffing of the support staff of the Development Corporation. What we call the Economic Development Director, Mr. Guy Andrews, recently left the position. It was rather sudden, and to most of the board, quite surprising. And I have invited him to come today to share some information with us that could not be shared with the board as a whole as individual people. Under the Texas Open Meetings Act, that would have constituted a walking quorum, illegal under the act. So I've asked him to share whatever wisdom, experience, wealth of knowledge he has. And I am basically granting him an open mic to share whatever he can. And we must realize he is no longer an employee of the city of San Angelo in support of this. He is giving us his time and his knowledge as a free citizen, a resident of this city. And Mr. Andrews, would you please share with us what you brought?
Certainly, Guy Andrews, and I'm the former Director of Economic Development, City of San Angelo Development Corporation. I was invited here to answer questions that might be asked of me, and I understand this item is in regard to the Administrative Services Agreement
It is.
with the city. I think initially, when that amount came up, I felt uncomfortable with it, but not really my decision. That's a board decision to question that, which the board in fact did. My advice to the board at that particular time was not to pursue that based on my experience with what I consider the deck could already be stacked against it. But the corporation decided to question that, and there was discussion in regard to that particular contract. So in regard to that particular issue, that's what I've got to say, but I'll be glad to answer other questions you might have.
Okay. Let's go ahead and look into the contract. And this may take some discussion. As a courtesy to you, I'd rather you not have to stand during the discussion. Would it be okay with the board if he took a seat at a microphone? We have no audio-visual presentation today, so if that's okay with the board? Okay, if you'd like to. Okay, as we look at the actual contract, do any of you board members have any questions starting out before I start to dig in? Okay. It is an attachment to today's agenda. If those in the gallery would like to follow along, you're more than welcome. And I apologize, I've got a ton of notes for today. I won't be going over all of them. But leading up to the placement of this item on the agenda, this issue on the agenda, I'm still getting used to the correct terminology. I did a lot of soul searching, because there are a lot of things that have stood in common practice over the years. I was first appointed to this board in 2011, served for a number of years until the city implemented term limits, stepped away for a little while, and came back. I am probably the longest serving member of this board, even with that gap in service. But it's disturbed me more and more that some of the things in this contract may not agree with the laws of the state of Texas. Let's see. With regard to the agenda itself, and even getting this item, this issue put on the agenda, our bylaws, and as I understand the administrative code, the local government code of the state of Texas, says that this agenda is the sole authority of this board. As the process for putting issues on the agenda has evolved over the years, most recently, just prior to Mr. Andrews leaving the position as our director, city management has assumed an authority over what goes on the agenda and what doesn't. It's appropriate for us to have legal review by our legal counsel provided under the city contract. But for the city manager's office to declare an authority that is not granted anywhere in the contract nor in law, I find very disturbing. When I read the contract, I do not find a provision in it for authority granted to the city over the operations of this board. That authority is vested in the city council. When I look back at all the city council agendas, presentations, and ultimately their votes, that council, as a panel of 7, has not considered nor endorsed some of the actions I'm seeing out of the city manager's office. Mr. Andrews, has there ever been a time that you experienced the city manager's office while you were still the director that encroached on that authority?
Yes, sir, quite truthfully, on several occasions. It began early on in my employment to where I tried to assemble partnership meetings with our economic development partners. After the first meeting, I was instructed by city management that I would have no more meetings, that the only meetings to be held in regard to economic development were those that the mayor conducted.
That the mayor conducted,
That the mayor conducted.
not the whole council?
That's correct.
I find that disturbing. And just to be clear, was the mayor in that cycle, that course of events, authorized by council to assert an executive authority?
I couldn't answer that question, but as far as I know, no.
Okay, thank you. And I don't want this to sound like a trial. I'm not an attorney. This is not a court of law. We can't subpoena anybody, but I trust everyone will be truthful in whatever they say. Okay. Again, I have reason to question that.
One other
Yes, sir.
example that I found personally disturbing was when an audit was ordered on the Chamber of Commerce without recognizing the board's authority to do that, and then coming up with a legal, quote, legal opinion that that was authorized. I felt that all of that process was very disingenuous. I was told that the audit was actually on the Chamber of Commerce, but was later told that the audit was on the contract, and that I was being borderline insubordinate by questioning that and asking the board for opinion, and also discussed it with the mayor. I was told that I had a tantrum. I didn't get my way. I experienced that type of attempts at bullying often in there. Primarily, I felt that management acted as more of a deterrent to conducting the business of the corporation. Oftentimes told when we wanted to have a discussion on issues, management doesn't support that, you're not going to have a meeting. So that type of disingenuous and hidden agenda is actually part of what led to my resignation. And actually, as it stands now, I have not retired because of other personal circumstances. I have not processed the TMRS part of it. So, in effect, I have resigned.
Yes, sir.
From the city. And there are just some events that took place in regard to the chamber contract, items being pulled from the agenda, and that sort of thing that were sort of the final straw. You ask about my early departure. I didn't think that I could actually tolerate another 30 days. I plan to take that retirement on August 31st. I accelerated it, basically fed up with the whole process and the whole disingenuous nature of the way the city conducted business or attempted to dominate the development corporation.
I appreciate that you took an ethical stance on that. It takes a man a lot of courage to walk away from a position paying what Mr. Andrews was paid to stand on his ethics. And we lost a good man in that. Again, I'm going to jump around a little bit on this contract, but for the clarity, especially for the public who may not understand, the staff that serves the City of San Angelo Development Corporation is in a position that I don't think most people would tolerate at all. They serve a two-headed beast, and I don't mean that in a derogatory term. I mean it so that you could have a visual. One head is that they are hired by the City of San Angelo, specifically our city manager. They report to an assistant city manager, but their duties are supposed to be to support this board. This I find in conflict of the sovereignty of the corporation under Texas law, Section 501, if you delve into that at any length, is rather explicit that this is a sovereign corporation under the laws of the state of Texas with all the powers of a corporation empowered by the state of Texas. So I see, and this is my personal opinion, we may talk about it as a whole board in a little bit, that the second head of this control factor is that although they are supposed to serve the board and its purposes, they report to and have employment consequences threatened against them in subordination for serving the board to the best of the board's purpose for the administration of the half-cent sales tax. This is a multi-million-dollar, over 10 million. Not going to pull that spreadsheet out right now. Annual cash flow thing. We do not take that lightly. We, the board members, take an oath when we accept the appointment to this board that we serve the people and are supposed to be the stewards of the money. Yet our hands are frequently tied because our staff has been harnessed and is serving a two-headed beast. If they do right on one hand, it may not be perceived as right as another. And again, I question the authority of city management under this contract to assert things that the city council has not reviewed, discussed, deliberated on, and ultimately voted on a motion. Policy level decisions are made, not authorized in this contract. But the bylaws and the ordinance that create this corporation say that changes in policy will come from the council. I'm perplexed, and I don't know what that what any resolutions there will be, any remedial action. But this, I'm confounded. I don't want this meeting to go on for a long time. But in order to delve into all the topics and have an open meetings discussion, if anyone has something to chime in on with the board, please do so.
Director Barrio,
Yes.
just one point of clarification. I think you are right about the local government code saying that all powers of corporations are vested in this corporation, so you can undertake projects and do anything a normal nonprofit corporation could do. But the act is also very clear in several provisions that all of that is subject to control of city council. So there is oversight authority for programs, expenditures, projects by city council.
And that is what I intended to state earlier. It may not have been as clear as you just verbalized it. In that multi-step process, the council creates the corporation, the council installs the board, the council then reviews budget and projects and has to ratify them. So I believe I mentioned that. But the day-to-day control is not delegated either in state law, ordinance, or bylaws.
State law, there is a provision that allows the corporation to enter into contracts to administer the economic development program. I think that's one authorization for the contract in general, but beyond that, the ordinance that sets up the corporation, it requires that COCDC use city personnel for administrative services, and I think that's consistent with the bylaws as well.
Okay.
So they would take an amendment to the ordinance and the bylaws to change that, but ultimately, under this contract, they are city employees, yes, and they serve the corporation.
Okay, you brought up a very good point, Brandon, and he didn't introduce himself, but Brandon Dyson is an attorney with the city attorney's office that has been assigned to this board. You bring up a very good point with regard to the ordinance that requires this board to use city services. It is this board member's belief that that is contrary to state law,
Okay.
the ordinance itself. And on October the 2nd, 2018, the city council had a meeting. And in that meeting, they ratified or adopted that particular ordinance. It was presented by City Clerk Brian Kendrick, who, by the way, is now our Human Resources Director, the city's Human Resources Director, amending Chapter 2, Article 2.07 of the San Angelo Code of Ordinances. In so doing, I went back and watched the YouTube video of that council meeting. There was no discussion of the paragraph that implemented that change, that this corporation shall use city services. In fact, if anyone wants to look at that video, specifically the 11 minutes from the 33-minute mark to the 44-minute mark on the video of the October 2nd, 2018 council meeting, is when the discussion of the changes to the ordinance were made, and the specific time allotted to the discussion of the change to the COSA-DC contracting requirement came between the 34-minute 53-second mark and the 35-minute 2-second mark. 9 seconds. And the entire presentation was, these are minor changes. In fact, I see it as very significant change. The full panel of the City Council did not get a hearing on it. I saw nothing in the agenda packet that delineated exactly what this change entailed. But if we look at various other sections, well, for clarity, Let me read the actual provision. Section 2.07.085, Administrative Services. The corporation shall contract with the city for provision of administrative services. Okay, that's pretty clear. I think most everybody in this room, the public, everybody could understand, shall. You've got to. But since 2011, I have attended many Texas Economic Development Council required training sessions, required in order to serve on this board. Everyone on this board has done it. Dr. Farah Gomez, one of our newest board members, is scheduled to do it. You're required to do it in a matter of months. We're legal. Our director, our staff, our assigned attorney have all accomplished that. And in that training, one of the things they have repeatedly said was that the sovereignty of the corporation has to be in the bylaws and verbiage that you may contract with the city, the founding entity of the corporation, to do your administrative services. They did not say shall, they said may. There is a very specific, and in my opinion, legal, I'm not a lawyer, but legal difference in that may. It provides that the corporation retains its sovereignty. If the contracted entity is not performing up to standards, we as a corporation have a fiduciary duty, a responsibility to pick a different contractor. And it's legally allowed. I believe with the extraordinarily brief presentation to council, I can only suppose the motive for not having an open meetings discussion about that particular point of the ordinance change. That's disturbing to me, because members of this board, had they been presented that before the ordinance passed, would have fought it tooth and nail based on the training we receive. Yet, as Mr. Andrews pointed out, we were told basically to sit down and shut up. And for a long time we did, because that looked like only one piece of the puzzle. And when you only look at one piece of the puzzle, you just see, oh, that's a pretty little piece. It looked rather benign at the time, even when council passed it as an ordinance. But I have to question, was that council action, was it placed, embedded deep in the ordinance, not even discussed with the actual council members? Was it placed there surreptitiously, underhandedly, a back door, because they knew we would not put it in the bylaws? This is a question, okay? We would not put it in the bylaws. So it seems as though they circumvented this board's control of the bylaws by implementing an ordinance that made it city law that we would have to perform that way. And even within that same passage of ordinance, required that all the changes be adopted within 6 months by the various boards. So it placed this corporation's board between a rock and a hard place. I am very uncomfortable with that. The list is long here.
Director Barrio,
Yes.
just one other clarification. I'm looking at the previous version of that ordinance. I think it was renumbered, but I think that provision was in there even before that amendment that you're talking about, since 1999. but it was previously numbered 2.07.255.
Okay, that explains something. Not sure how to digest that yet.
Well, I mean, my point being that it was in there before the 2018 amendment that you're talking about.
It still erodes the sovereignty of the corporation.
Okay.
Others on this board may see it otherwise. Effectively, we are forced to use services of the city. Now, if we also go back to the laws that permit the city to found the corporation, let me go back to the training that this board is required to have, our staff is required to have. Our legal counsel has. Not in section 501C. I'm sorry, not 501C. I'm thinking tax code. In section 501, the board has to have the training. But in that provision of the law, I believe it's in the 2700 series, it says that in order to be the founding entity of a corporation, the city administrator and the administrator of the entity and the municipal attorney also have to be trained. When in my discovery, I dug into that, and just for clarity, almost all of this research I did on my own. I've talked to folks at the council. I've talked to a lot of other economic development professionals outside of this city. But my personal background is an intelligence analyst. I was trained for the military. I also had an engineering career and a career in death care with a funeral home. But I often go back to my intelligence gathering training. I enjoy doing in-depth research. Okay, so back to that statute that says that even the city administrator and the municipal attorney, not a subordinate to the municipal attorney, but both have to be trained in the economic development laws.
Director
So-
Barrio, are you referring to 502.101?
No, sir. Let me find that for you.
The provision I'm looking at is talking about that training, and it's a 24-month period. You have to have the training, and the way when I'm looking at it reads, it says, shall attend a training seminar regarding the operation of a corporation created under this subtitle, and it says the municipal attorney, administrator, or clerk, and then it has a separate subsection. It says, and the corporation's executive director. So I read that to be, it could be one of those individuals, but then it must also be and the corporation's executive director or other person responsible for the corporation's daily administration. So,
Okay, and once again, this comes from a section way out in the 2700s. I apologize. I actually didn't intend to get to that. But you brought it up, and pursuing it is appropriate. Folks, this is how an actual open meeting should happen, where there is discussion and deliberation, points and counterpoints. Okay. I wish I had the mind of some of our staff that has all of this so memorized. They are an excellent staff. Okay, I apologize. I
Mr.
did not
Vice
find
President.
the actual reference in my notes.
The legal reference that you're referring to is the one that Mr. Dyson has addressed. 502.101 training regarding operation of corporation at least once in each 24-month period. The following persons associated with the corporation shall attend a training seminar regarding the operation of a corporation created under this subtitle. 1, the municipal attorney, administrator, or clerk of the municipality that authorized the creation of the corporation. For our purposes, the city of San Angelo. And 2, the corporation's executive director or other person responsible for the corporation's daily administration. Just to note, the seminar must provide at least 6 hours of instruction on topics relating to the legal and proper operation of a corporation created under that subtitle, and it must be held at least 4 times each calendar year.
Okay, the 4 times each calendar year refers to the offering of the course, not any requirement that we do it 4 times a year. Nolan, would you please read again for me the part that mentions the city administrator?
The municipal attorney, administrator, or clerk of the municipality that authorized the creation of the corporation.
Okay. I checked with Brian Kendrick via email yesterday and find that folks covered under this contract are not all up to speed on that training. As I mentioned, the board and our assigned attorney are. So I question some of the disparity in our opinions, because we have those who are trained and those who are not.
Maybe it's a matter of interpretation, but the way I'm reading it is it's the municipal attorney, administrator, or clerk, but then the next subsection of that follows an and. So because it says municipal attorney, administrator, or clerk, I think it could be any one of those people. It doesn't have to be all of them. But then after the and, it has to be also the executive director or other person responsible for the corporation's daily administration. So I don't think there's a failure of training.
Okay.
I think my training would satisfy that first subsection. And then, I mean, now that our executive director is gone, I mean, I think there's a time period by which someone that is doing the day-to-day operations could complete that training.
Agreed.
And I'm not sure that that's passed yet. And I haven't looked into who's doing that yet, so.
Okay. But as an ethical basis,
The next training offered is full up, and I'm on the waiting list to be added to that. If that doesn't bear fruit, there is a virtual opportunity in December, and we'll go that way.
very good. But I think that there's an ethical responsibility that if anyone is going to weigh in officially on the performance of this corporation, training becomes imperative, even to the point that it extends to some of our contractors. We have representative contractors with the Chamber of Commerce, Michael Looney and Mike Berry. And I believe both of those have received training. Is that correct, Mike? Michael?
Not with any kind of municipal custody type course.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. It was something I thought. But again, in various emails back and forth with city management, it became evident to me that I have the benefits of training. And the disparity in our opinions seems to be rooted in that's not consistent across all the people involved in these processes. So getting back to the root of the agenda item, part of this contract requires that we maintain compliance. Our city attorney asserts that we are. I question that, but under the city contract that says that the council has said we must use the city attorney. If this board even questions the authority or the the renderings of our counsel, we cannot hire an outside attorney for a counterpoint. And
You
that
could
is
if
what-
that was authorized by council.
Pardon?
If that was, assuming the ordinance was amended to allow it and council authorized it, I mean, it is doable, but yes, there's a process to undertake that, yeah.
Okay. In training other than what I participated in, just education on economic development, one of the particular firms that offered language particularly emphasizing the may versus shall provision. But they also used it in their commentary that you don't hire the same attorneys when you're going through a divorce. You and your spouse want a divorce. Don't go to the same law firm and hire two attorneys from the same law firm. They're going to consult with each other. So ethically, this board is put into a position where we consult Mr. Dyson. He reports to Teresa James, the city attorney. On a certain level, he's required to divulge to her matters.
That's not
I
correct,
see you
sir.
shaking your head, sir.
Okay.
But please let me finish.
I'll address it after.
Okay, on a certain level, there is pressure of employment. And that is exactly the ethical reason you want the ability to have different parties representing you. That particular training was generated by a need by other Texas cities to resolve this very conflict, where the board of directors of a corporation end up in contest with their forming entity. And as our attorney just said, we could go to an outside attorney if we went through council, the city, in order to get permission to do that. Is that a fair?
Yeah, so to address the conflict or the seeming conflict that you brought up, in my office, I'm assigned to the COSA DC. Teresa James is assigned to the city. Yes, she's my boss, but I'm also bound by the professional rules of conduct that bind attorneys in general outside of my employment with the city. So if I ever felt there was a situation where there was a conflict where I couldn't adequately advise this board, I would absolutely advise that a different attorney would be appointed in that scenario. So yes, there's some discussion of items that is both the city and COSA DC, but for the most part, I mean, city and COSA DC should be a joint, not entity, but there's not adversarial, it shouldn't be an adversarial scenario in most instances, but if it was, I absolutely would advise this board, as I'm bound to by the professional rules of standards, and despite what Ms. James, my boss, would tell me if I thought there was a conflict. So I want the board to be very clear on that.
Yes.
That I wouldn't.
And in a perfect world, it would be a harmonious marriage between the city of San Angelo and the Development Corporation.
Right.
Some of the motivations for training, such as we need to have the provisions that allow the corporation to act as an independent corporation to some degree, is because in a type B, under the law, type B, economic development corporation, things have historically in other cities gotten out of hand where the half-cent sales tax funds end up being a piggy bank for pet projects. politically motivated rather than approach sensibly with an expected return on the dollar for the taxpayer. It becomes a very challenging thing, and we do try to vet that, and that is the purpose of this board.
Well,
But-
I'd like to ferret out that sentiment that you are correct. This board's job is to fund projects, and all of those projects are subject to a political process. So to characterize that activity as funding pet projects, we're a piggy bank for pet projects. All of those projects receive due process in which political figures are involved. And if you're aware of a project that has not received appropriate scrutiny from those duly elected officials, we will certainly look into it. But that is the nature of this organization, is to administer revenues.
I can give you two good examples of where that did not happen. We're challenged by the board of directors. Number one was the Chadburn Streetscape project. Basically, our organization was told, here's your share of what you're going to fund. There was no discussion with the board in regard to that issue. The same thing with the West Texas Water Fund project. We're told, here, you're going to fund this. In fact, as the president at the time challenged that, but there was always that, well, if you challenge, you could be removed from the board. So that's not always the case, and too often there's that type of thing. I believe that the corporation has become a cash cow. The city has attempted to control the corporation, and that's what this issue is about, is control, attempted control of the corporation by the city.
Thank you, Mr.
On that
Andrews.
basis, we will review those projects and determine that they received appropriate authorizations to move forward. Is your allegation that those received a no vote from this board or from council or both, and then staff executed the projects in spite of those no votes?
What my statement is that the board was more or less coerced to do that rather than enter into a big situation. They did, in fact, pass those, but I think you have to really look at the circumstances. Those were dictated to Costa DC.
I think one point he made clear is council's attempt to control the corporation, and I think we've heard earlier that council does control the corporation.
I'm not saying that council has attempted to control the corporation. I'm saying that city management has attempted to control the corporation by sometimes even bullying tactics, and on your part, Mr. Dane. So if you want to take the gloves off, we can talk about that, but I would advise that we not pursue this further right here.
We'll still follow up with those projects and provide you with a determination of whether or not they received the appropriate approvals so that the air would be cleared on those two items.
I think we just saw the curtain pulled back a little bit on the lack of harmonious relations between city management and the staff assigned to support the corporation. One of the performance measures in the contract is specifically that we work together toward the common goals. I say specifically, that's not the verbiage, but that's the intent. And working together can be done in a dictatorial manner, or it could be done in honest, open discussion where opinions are expected to be rendered and accusations of insubordination toward the dictatorial level they just erode the whole harmony. And quite frankly, that's got to stop. I try to read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, at least annually. I fail in it. But basically, the premise is that you get a whole lot more done with sugar than salt. We see that all the time, and I think that's really the root of this contract between the city of San Angelo Development Corporation and the city of San Angelo for the provision of administrative services.
Mr. Barry, I wanted to pose just a real quick question. Article 6 of the contract says, is titled Termination. And it says either party may terminate this agreement by giving the other party notice in writing in termination of this agreement within 30 days. How is that possible?
I think.
The
this
ordinance
is it.
says shall. We have no choice. Oh, they have no choice. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, there would be an amendment process to the ordinance. I mean, they could terminate it, but then I think they would be without administrative services until that ordinance was modified, yeah.
Okay, that brings up a very good point, one that I was intending to get to, but let's jump to it.
And I'm not trying to take sides here. I just,
Oh, no,
when we were flipping, I just happened to see that.
the timing is perfect, Bob, Mr. Schneeman. I'm trying to maintain a level of decorum here. I know we're all on first name basis. But if we were to vote today, or if a motion were made, let's pursue this. What's going to be the consequence of this agenda item? Motions may come from it, and action may be taken, okay? If that motion were to be, let's terminate the contract, give the appropriate notice, or even if that was modified, until we figure out what to do, let's renew it only on a month-to-month basis. Whatever that were to look like, where does that leave us? By ordinance, this corporation is prohibited from finding any other alternate provider. Does everybody get that? Okay. If we have no recourse for challenging this contract, and that very term in the contract, in that other training that I had gotten, says that this contract should not automatically renew. It should be reviewed and approved annually. So even in the verbiage of the contract, which was, I can only presume, originally, years ago, verbiage was put in there based on what our legal counsel decided was a workable contract. At whose bequest, I can't know. I can't say. But when you put together the circumvention of the bylaws by an ordinance requiring this, it almost appears, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I try to base it on fact, okay? But it almost appears that, okay, this piece is in place, and this piece is in place, and this piece is in place. Now we have control of the corporation. So the public question becomes, what is the remedy for that? It's certainly not one that allows for staff to be intimidated because they talk to board about what they see. they have a responsibility in supporting the board to be very open and communicative with us without having to report that conversation to the hiring process management. Do you see where that conflict just naturally has teeth in it? I'm confused. Where is the real separation of this corporation from the direct management by city management, and from what I see, not overseen by the full panel of 7 city council members? And there's confusion in that terminology again. I have to reiterate. That is 6 city council members and the mayor. When we say city council members, does it mean the panel of 7, or does it just mean the panel of 6, or the 6 who have been elected to be the representatives? Okay, so let's be clear. It's a panel of 7. Does any one of them have an open door to the city manager's office or anyone in that food chain to say, I need this done, I want this done? If you don't do it, I think there are some who could speak of specific examples of that, but I don't want this to be totally accusatory. But rest assured, it happens. I've received phone calls, I've felt the pressure. Even in the posting of this agenda, it is surprised how fast the phone calls in the background must have flown for a phone call from one to result in the phone call from another on the same topic that, as far as I knew, they weren't aware of. I will use the example of posting this agenda item. Rightfully, our representative city attorney called me and said the description is too brief. What are you going to talk about? What's your end game? Essentially, that's what you asked, is it not, Brandon?
Yeah, I asked for some background on the item. I don't think I said that it was too brief.
Okay.
But
I believe you said too vague.
I mean, you can have an item for discussion and action on the agreement. If the agreement is going to come to me for some kind of amendment, or the board's looking to me for some kind of legal opinion on it, yeah, I was curious to know where the discussion might lead so I could, render that advice. So yes, that was the purpose of my call.
And my answer to you, as I recall, was I don't know where the discussion is going to lead. But because of the Open Meetings Act, it has to be an open discussion. Otherwise, the members of this board can't all talk because we're prohibited from having a walking quorum. So the only time we can all talk is when we're sitting here in an open meeting. So ultimately, there was enough information in the caption for this agenda issue for it to be posted. But shortly thereafter, Assistant City Manager Michael Dane, who is also the interim Economic Development Director, called me with the same questions and wanted preparedness. And rightfully so. That's great. And I honestly don't remember if I mentioned this to Mr. Dyson or Mr. Dane, but I said the preparedness comes in every participant coming with knowledge and honesty. And I said that because quite frequently I've not seen the honesty fully. I've seen limited disclosure. I've seen evidence of things done behind closed doors brought to a public meeting that is here's the item, there's no discussion, and suddenly it's voted on. I have a problem with that. And because it is parented by this contract, that is a problem. Again, I don't necessarily want to have to buy lunch for everybody. So there are other departments that support us. purchasing and finance. The list is long. Again, public information, and by the way, public information, thank you for putting this out to the world. And I want to thank a lot of folks that I talked to for consultation that said they'd be watching this meeting. Mr. Andrews, are there any of these functions within this contract that you're aware of, background information that this board needs to be aware of in consideration of the contract?
Personal opinion here is, the way I view this, and the reason that I didn't necessarily challenge it, feeling that the deck was already stacked, is I consider this contract to be probably one of the biggest business retention expansion projects that we are, through this contract, paying for additional employees that we did not ask for. At the same time, we were not allowed to add employees or to even come up with an adequate succession plan. And that
Just for
sort of
clarity, additional employees in other support departments?
and primarily in accounting.
Okay.
The department, I believe that there were employees that were added that were primarily through that contract paying for those services that were not necessarily required or needed or asked for by staff or the board.
Thank you. And you mentioned that not being able to get extra staff being the Economic Development Department staff that supports this board? This
Right,
corporation?
and I felt that the process of when I created or attempted to create a assistant director for succession planning and that sort of thing, I felt like that whole process was disingenuous. And we had discussions in regard to that. The panel, so-called panel to review that position description, never invited me to comment one way or the other on it. And in fact, that position was created in such a fashion in order to obtain the employee. That employee had to take a 2-level downgrade to accept that position, but was in such a position that they really had no alternative. It was that would, come over and we'll try to see what happens, or they were in a no-win situation and probably still are to this day.
Thank you, sir. There are just a whole lot of holes in this contract, in my opinion. It's flawed. But it's what we have to work with. I believe that entertaining a motion to terminate the contract would be corporate suicide, in that we would lose the support staff, we would lose finance. Without this function, we have a staff of economic development employees that might even be terminated because COSA DC at that point may not exist.
Mr. Barrio, the employees you say are your staff are city employees, and
Yes, they are.
They exist through the existence of that contract. So in the termination of that contract, they would not be available to serve either.
That's right. I appreciate that clarification, Mr. Dane.
This also brings up an interesting point, since we want to talk about the employees of it. One of the things that resulted in my resignation from the city was in this budget process, to where theoretically we have 4 employees in the Development Corporation. I was handed by Mr. Dane a spreadsheet made probably by somebody in the budget department without knowledge of how economic development organizations are structured, that there are different varieties. There's type A, type B, MDDs, that sort of thing. A so-called analysis that showed and was told you're going to have to reduce employees. You have 6 employees. And I said, we have 4. Well, in the opinion of management, you have 6. And I said, who are the other 2? So that's Michael Looney and Mike Berry with the Chamber of Commerce. And the question, you know, does everybody that have contractors get their employees counted in that? That's the type of disingenuous stuff, and I know where that's coming from. That is an attempt to combine that chamber operation into the Costa DC operation. And I also believe, in addition to that, and where it really began was the budget cut with the DMO. I know where that came from. It did not come from council. It came from an individual, and the wishes to, I think, affect that type of organization, which I think are ultimately going to fail. It was a very unethical act.
Did I understand correctly that you believe that it's an effort to defund economic development on the Chamber of Commerce side?
In my opinion, the fact that also the agenda item was pulled off, it should have been an audit or a renewal of the chamber contract. That was pulled off by city management, not by anybody here. And that has resulted in a huge conflict which is spread out into this community, and it needs to be addressed.
Okay, so
If
that
I
also-
could, the discussion about staffing is something that I'll be talking about later on in the agenda, so we'll cover that more fully when that agenda item comes up.
Okay, it certainly has ramifications in this discussion, but acknowledged. Information shared may be duplicative to that agenda item. Okay, the spreadsheet that you were showing, I'm presuming Mr. Dane showed it to you?
Yes, and was asked, to examine how we could look at that and to cut staff and that sort of thing.
Okay.
My response to that was, I'll show you how to cut staff. I'm out of here.
Well, we're certainly sorry it came to that. Was this part of a citywide staffing realignment?
Should we continue this, or should we open the subsequent agenda item? I'm prepared to answer. I just want to make sure he's happy.
I agree. Let's do this legitimately.
Is this relevant to the chamber discussion?
Level of
or
staffing
the-
is, the level of staffing is one of the topics in my presentation.
Yeah,
later
Mr.
on.
President, I mean, you could read those items for public discussion so that we can, just so we're not in violation of the Open Meetings Act, so that they've been read and have a joint discussion on those items, but you'd need to read it into the record, yeah.
Okay.
Whatever you guys prefer.
Okay, let's take a side note for a moment for attorney consultation. When you called me questioning, or when you and I talked, we had a number of phone calls back and forth to get the conversation completed. But you wanted more detail on the agenda issues, specifically this agenda issue, in order for it to get the legal rubber stamp to go ahead with publishing the agenda. in a subsequent conversation with Mr. Dane, he asked if the whole agenda, as I had now seen, looked good to me. He asked for my approval. Specifically with the agenda item, he added that we're talking about opening now. My reply to him, legitimately, was I don't have approval authority over the agenda. Any board member can place, not request, place any item on the agenda he feels appropriate, he or she. I apologize. I had noticed that item, and my immediate knee-jerk reaction was, there seems to be a different litmus test for my placement of an item and the placement of an item by the interim economic development director / assistant city manager. And quite frankly, I have a hard time differentiating which hat Mr. Dane is wearing at any one time. So in light of the placement of agenda items, in either case, he is not one of the board members placing an item on the agenda. As interim director, sure, staff, that's cool. We also have imposed, typically agenda items are to be submitted, agenda issues, I apologize again, are supposed to be submitted by the Wednesday before the meeting as a courtesy to staff for agenda preparation. But the conversation I just mentioned occurred on Friday. There was even mention when I asked about it that we wouldn't have to post the agenda until Sunday. Technically, that satisfies the Open Meetings Act 72 hours. So I guess you could say 8:29 a.m. Sunday morning is the last it could be posted. At the time, I didn't realize we had an outdoor bulletin board here at the city. But in a reply email to Mr. Dane, I said, please don't jeopardize the legal conduct of this meeting today by the late posting, because as I saw it, the posting of that agenda on the indoor bulletin board, which I thought was the only place it would be, would not constitute compliance with the Open Meetings Act, in that the lobby of City Hall is not open to the public on that day. It would have had to have been posted using someone's personal key to the City Hall. So in order to have compliance with the 72-hour limit, it must be posted on Fridays, which is actually what's said in our bylaws. So even the proposal by someone in city management to delay the posting of the agenda item doesn't pass the same litmus test that my placement of an agenda item seemed to necessitate. So
Brandon,
with that, before
Brandon, do you think we posted legally?
ultimately we did.
Yes.
All right.
And
so-
I agree.
All right.
But I believe that background is important to my question now is, does this agenda item we're about to open, potentially open, meet the same litmus test that makes it compliant with the Open Meetings Act?
The item, I think, is compliant with the Open Meetings Act. My only suggestion or advice is if you want to open another discussion that's on another item, read it into the record. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. I wanted that to be perfectly clear that our legal counsel does say that it's compliant with the Open Meetings Act, even though even though the verbiage is very broad, in my opinion.
In my mind, the difference between the two is you are proposing discussion and action. My item is simply for discussion. I'm not proposing any action at this point, just informing the board, and we'll follow up as the board sees fit.
Okay. I'm agreeable to opening it. Max, you're the president.
So just to clarify, so what we're saying is, item E, right, on the agenda, to include that into the discussion that we currently have, which is still item A? Is that what we're saying?
That's my understanding, yeah. If the board wants to open that up, then to read that in the record.
Okay. I mean, we could, personally, I try to be very organized. I'm a little tentative on doing that, just personally. I'd rather just close the topic on A and move on down the agenda personally, just so we can have some progress.
Yeah, I agree, and we need to close A, by the way, and while my mic is on before it gets cut off, I understand why we're having this conversation, but it has taken a tone that I believe is borderline inappropriate right now. And so I think this agenda needs to be closed. We do need to have follow-up discussions, and we can work through how and where we have those. But I think right now, the tone that it's taking on is becoming inappropriate for this moment. And so I believe we need to close it, and we need to have future discussions.
Would you like to word that as a motion?
That was my motion. I make that motion. I want to close A, and I want to have future discussions, but I want to do it in an appropriate manner.
Brandon, do we need to ask for public comment?
I don't know that we have to have a motion if we're not taking action. So I think
move on.
if everyone's good moving on, then yeah.
I agree. It's time to move on.
Okay. And just, before we kind of close it, just a point of clarification on my end, just, again, tighten up the process and dot the i's and cross the t's. I think the agenda item was to discuss and possible action regarding the administrative services agreement. So, before we move on, is there any, I guess, intent to review the services agreement, which is about to be renewed, or what are we doing with that? What's the consensus on that piece of it, or are we just going to allow it to renew and just, talk about it next year?
I believe without action, we are letting it stand with the automatic renewal.
Okay.
But
When exactly does it auto-renew?
can you answer that?
September 30th?
September 30th, Friday.
Or actually, I'm sorry, October of each fiscal year.
Yeah.
So would it be, I wouldn't be opposed to calling a special meeting in executive session and talking about this, right? We've got a month to do it.
I don't know that it elevates to the standards for an executive session. Would it not have to be an open session?
If there was consultation with attorney, if y'all had some legal questions for me, we could do that in executive session.
Okay. Thank you.
And also, we need to take a public comment before we close it, and if you want to take a motion to bring it back on a future agenda item, close it now and bring it back on a future agenda, we could do that, just so it's clear that no action was taken today on the contract itself, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I think it's appropriate to review it in more detail down the road. Obviously, it is what it is as it stands right now. But I think, so we're not in the same boat a year from now. We probably, as a board, want to take a look at it and have it placed on a future agenda item, would be my thinking, if the board's in agreement with that.
Right. My opinion is we can't continue. I mean, I believe we're getting information that some of us might have already been, some of us know about some of the items that were brought up today. I'll be honest with you. You talk about transparency. Speaking for myself, this board, we don't communicate outside. I mean, you're shaking your head. I mean, we just don't. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I have either one of these guys up here phone number. So what was asked today by Director Barrio was a surprise to me. We weren't teed up to this. And I think I'm not going to say it was a waste of time, John. I think you did a fine job asking the right questions. But I think we've got a division here that we need to figure out a path forward on, and accusing one and accusing another, quite frankly, without a heads up, right? I mean, we're surprising folks, and I just don't think that is fair. And I'm not an attorney, right? Most of the time, I'm a hostile witness. But I'm just saying, it's coming to a point to where we need to move on, and we need to have, however we need to word it, and however we need to stay within, compliant. We do need to have a future discussion about this contract, and I want to. But I think as of right now, it's time to move on.
I agree.
Okay. All right, then we'll move on to item number,
And-
or we need to have public comment, right?
Yeah, we do need public comment.
All right, well, it's 10 a.m., we'll open it to public comment.
I'm Daniel Valenzuela, the city manager for the city of San Angelo. I too am perplexed. I'm really concerned with what was said today. John, you had sent me an email, Mr. Burial. You had sent me an email, then I had asked you to meet with the city attorney because you had some misunderstandings about the law. You're trying to interpret the law, sir, and you're not a professional attorney. We have people that have been in municipal law for many years. So I asked you to go meet with the attorney. A lot of what you brought up today could have been rectified and, as far as resolved in that meeting with her or with our city attorney here. I am just concerned. This shouldn't be a we-they. We should all be working together. We want the best for this community, economic development-wise. We want the absolute best. There's no reason for this. Sovereignty, this discussion on sovereignty again, everything still goes through city council for ratification, okay? I've heard this before, John. You brought this back, I think you brought this up years back, and this is coming back again. I want to make sure that we're working well together. I was really concerned with Guy Andrews being here and assumptions that he's made about a certain member of the council, whomever you're talking about. Those assumptions don't need to be made here. If you had a concern, Guy, when you're here on staff with Mike or anything he did, you should have come and talked to me. You never did that. I open up for my staff members, my directors, anyone that wants to come and meet with me over a concern that's happened, they can do that. I have an open door policy. I never once saw you in my office to come and discuss with me a concern that you had. And I just want to make that very clear. But with that said, I am perplexed. We need to do better than this. We cannot be fighting each other. And I'm not going to do that. I want the best. I want the best for Costa DC. And right now, what I'm seeing, I'm very troubled. Thank you.
I would like to follow up and make comments based on what I just heard from Mr. Valenzuela. The thing that I encountered during the 4 years I was here is avoidance of issue by our city manager to address issues. We had a serious issue that he allowed to fester. I had sent a detailed memorandum on it. Was basically told, was there a deadline on that 2 months after the fact? The very fact that Mr. Valenzuela showed up for this meeting is a prime example of avoidance technique until it festers, okay? This is what I encounter. It's either avoidance, don't answer the question, management doesn't support it, and that sort of thing. So to go to Mr. Valenzuela is typically, in my opinion, a waste of time because the issues don't get addressed, or they get addressed, I think, in the one situation where I was involved in, it should have been addressed. The person that should have been disciplined in that was not disciplined, but people that were witnesses to statements that were made were disciplined. So again, this all is the reason I resigned. I think there is a definite lack of transparency, and we will address that in the correct forum.
Mr. President,
Sir?
I'd like a point of order, please. I think, look, I'm trying not to be redundant because I've already said it. And I agree there's a lot of issues that need to work out. But quite frankly, the city manager doesn't work for us. And look, I 100% appreciate you being here today. And let me tell you, as a New Yorker, that takes guts. And I appreciate that, right? But, guys, we're not the city council. And we're not here to talk about how staff operates on the fourth floor. They don't answer to us, they answer to the city council. And if anybody has a problem with any member of staff, that's what their elected official is for. And so I don't think this is the time or the place to discuss the city personnel, especially city management, one of the three. This is not the time or place.
Okay, well, I think we're at public comment. If there's no other public comment, we could continue on the next item. Is there any public comment? All right, if not, we'll
Just
close
clarify,
it.
did y'all want to do a motion to put it like on a future agenda, or, I mean, you can.
The services agreement, is that what we're saying, President?
Yeah,
Or-
just a motion to bring it back on a future agenda.
I'll make the motion that we bring the service agreement with the city of San Angelo back on next month's agenda. And hopefully we could have a meaningful workshop sort of session.
Okay, we have a first by Director Barrier. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second by Director Spano. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to item B, discussion and possible action regarding the coastal DC disbursement policy, including designating business liaisons. Presentation by First Vice President John Barrier.
Okay, so here I am again. This one hopefully will be much shorter. When I was on the board years ago, the disbursement policy was established. We've had changes in staff. And basically, this is sort of a who gets to sign checks conversation. With the recent changes, I just want to make sure that, I guess a couple months ago, a signature card from the bank was passed around to all the board directors and signature signers. With Mr. Andrews' departure, do we know if that updated card has been put on file with the bank? And I'm kind of addressing Nora, as the secretary may know, or you, Michael, you may know.
I don't know what the result of that card was, but I asked the Director of Finance and Corporate Treasurer to begin moving us toward a streamlined process where corporate checks were handled the same way city checks are, so that we didn't have two separate processes going where it wasn't necessary. If corporate checks needed to be executed and distributed outside of that cycle, we could still do that, but it wasn't necessary to chase down signatures that we weren't already chasing down.
So does
So
that
again,
include-
I don't have a concrete answer for that particular signature card, but I did ask her to move in that direction, and so that's the extent of my knowledge on that item.
Okay, has direction been given for any particular individuals to be taken off or put on other than Mr. Andrews with his departure?
My direction was that the process should be consistent with the city's process.
So yeah, I believe it was August the 10th, I received an email talking about the updated card. Are you saying that since August, this hasn't happened?
Tina, can you help me? I don't know what has happened.
And I apologize, I said, are you telling me, are you telling this board?
Tina Dersky, Director of Finance and Corporate Treasurer. We have not updated the card that's on file with the bank since Mr. Andrews' departure.
Is there a reason for that delay? I remember signing the card.
From my perspective, there's no reason for the delay. It just hasn't been necessary since we have people available on staff that are able to sign for checks and other authorizations that the Development Corporation requires.
Okay, if you would please, Tina. There are two purposes in an updated card. I trust Mr. Andrews' integrity, but if he were to have a check that he could write in hand, or even possibly a counter check, his name still being on the card could cause us some tremendous problems. That updated signature card should be handled, in my opinion, in a most expeditious manner, not because I distrust any former check signer, but because it is the right thing to do. And as finance officials, I would hope we would do the right thing.
Thank you for that observation.
Do we have any other discussion on our disbursement policy? Does staff have any concerns about the disbursement policy? Then I think administratively we've covered this. I don't see a need for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I think we do have I believe an agenda item to talk about our bylaws that may also include some of this discussion.
Yes, it does. But as far as specific discussion of the disbursement policy, right now, I think we'll still be covered by the bylaws question, which is, I believe, the next, no, two issues away. Good to go on, Max?
Okay. Yep,
Public comment?
okay. We'll entertain some public comment. It is 10:13. Do we have any public comment regarding this topic?
Director Barrio and Mr. President, during an executive committee meeting a number of months ago, it was expressed by the executive committee, without identifying the specific committee member at this time, I can't recall, that there was a desire expressed in that meeting to streamline some of the internal approvals, and the direction was given to the executive director at the time to streamline those internally by adding additional staff approvers. Our corporate secretary coordinated with finance staff. I'm uncertain of the outcome, but the treasurer could shed some light on that. But I do want to provide that as context to frame the discussion regarding this item.
With that, I'd like to reopen the board discussion on it. Yes, with the addition, I do remember what was discussed in executive session, and that was intended.
I'm sorry, did you say executive session? Are we talking about an executive session discussion? Because that's
the
not.
executive committee meeting. I apologize for misspeaking that.
I believe it's called the Bylaws Committee.
We truly want to do things at the speed of business, not at the speed of government. And that is the purpose of this corporation, having a disbursement policy that includes checks below $1,000 prepared and signed by the business liaison or treasurer only one signature required, and checks equal or greater than $1,000 can be prepared and signed by the business liaison or treasurer. 2 signatures required. Board members can sign. For the sake of clarity, a business liaison or treasurer. Nolan, I think you're best versed in this. Tell us what a business liaison is.
My understanding is, at the time we informed the committee that Guy Andrews, the outgoing executive director, was the business liaison.
Okay. So by not naming names, just a descriptive, we had in-house signature capability. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
With his departure, did you take on signing anything?
As it currently stands, I should be listed as one of the signatories. Mr. Dane, by virtue of his position as Assistant City Manager, also would have authorization. And now, in his role as Interim Executive Director, would also have that ability.
Have you signed any checks in this time period?
No, sir, I have not.
Okay. Okay. We've had additional discussion. Is there additional public comment? Oh, I don't mean to usurp your authority.
You're fine. Is there any additional public comment? Okay. Seeing none, then are we good to move on to item
Yes.
C? Okay. So I'll read item C. Consider appointing coastal DC representative for various boards, including but not limited to the San Angelo Water Advisory Board, San Angelo Chamber of Commerce ex officio representative, Ports to Plains Alliance, Transportation Advocates of Texas, and the Gulf Coast Strategic Highway Coalition. Presentation by First Vice President John Barrier.
Okay, my presentation on this is brief. These are all positions that, not positions, but appointments by this Board of Directors for representation on the listed boards and such, memberships, board positions, advisory positions, that with Mr. Andrews' departure need to be designated to someone else. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. President. Do you want to handle the appointments?
Well, okay, so just to clarify, so what you're saying is that these boards, these positions were occupied or handled by the outgoing executive director, and so we need to appoint someone to assume these positions that he vacated?
Yes, historically, some have been filled by board members, some by the Economic Development Director, and there was a time when even one of them was intended, and this board wanted specifically to put me in the advisory role as part of a transportation committee with Ports to Plains, but that designation was shot down by a single member of the City Council. So my answer to your question is it doesn't have to be the Executive Director. Oh, I'm sorry, the Economic Development Director. It can be a board member.
Okay. And
again, the sovereign nature of this board, we have purview over these appointments.
Okay. Well, I think it'd be foolish of me, without discussion with respective board members and staff, to just arbitrarily assign appointments at this time. So I think it should be a conversation we should have as a board, match interests with these respective opportunities and so forth. So I think we need to move this to a future agenda item, or if appropriate, an executive session where we could deliberate as a board and discuss these appointments.
Yes, and I want to be perfectly clear, I am not lobbying to be the representative on anything. I would serve if asked, if I feel qualified for that. And part of the ongoing discussion does need to be who is best qualified for it from our pool of board members and staff. And that anyone serving in these capacities in the interim, I will make the motion that that interim filling be done by the president, specifically designating that this will be our board representative until such time as the board meets again.
So is that a motion?
That is a motion.
So can you repeat the motion again, just?
Yes, that until we reconvene and address this as a future agenda item, that any representative sent to any of the meetings of the various advisory boards or alliances or coalitions, et cetera, be a designee by the president of this board of directors, just so that this corporation maintains authority over that representation.
Okay. So to clarify, are we saying that these positions currently as they stand since Mr. Andrews' departure have not been attended? Or-
They've been vacated, and I understand that Mr. Dane has attended a Ports to Plains Alliance meeting. Is that correct, Michael?
I attended a conference, and there is a meeting in November, which I believe to be a board meeting that will occur in San Angelo. And so in the absence of a decision by the board or direction from the board, I'll attend, but I will defer board participation to the direction of that board. Okay. In other words, I would expect that that board would have criteria associated with appointment, that I would have minute action, that I was the official representative. But whether that happens or not, I anticipate the need to attend but not necessarily participate as a board member.
Okay.
And we'll honor what y'all think is appropriate for these appointments.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree. Okay. So then do we have a second on that motion?
Maybe. So let me just ask a question. So what I don't want to do is have folks serving on a board in interim, because my opinion, I don't think it does the board any justice, because they're not going to be there for the long term. And I think as these boards meet, most of them probably meet monthly, I would venture to say, and I would bet there's probably a few on them. I'm not familiar with a few of those. They may even meet quarterly. I don't know that answer. So I just don't think there's enough time for an interim appointee to learn their process, to get up to speed, and to lend any type of advice of any worth, in my opinion. I think if we're going to appoint board members, then we need to make sure that those board members are going to stay, right? I don't want to I personally don't feel like we need to have anyone as an interim member of one of these boards, because they're all very important. And so if it's something that the executive director does, then I think we need to sit back until we get an executive director and they can kind of wrap their arms around it and be embedded in that board. I don't think an interim does justice to these boards, but again, my opinion. Michael?
I think Mr. Barrios' comment is on point, that we need to continue a presence. Whether or not, if it's a board, our presence in the past has been a board position, I think is less important. But I think you're right that the temporary nature suggests a presence rather than a permanent appointment to the board, unless the board has a need or we have a specific need. So I think that the motion might be useful in the event that we have meetings that are coming up, and we will attend, but not necessarily be taking a formal position. And so I agree with the philosophy of presence, and I agree with the idea that a permanent appointment may not be right at this time,
Yeah.
so.
And I fully agree. Any permanent appointment should be a decision of a quorum. But for attendees to, as Michael very well said, we need to maintain the presence. So
Okay.
my motion is that you, as the board president, assure that we have somebody going.
So repeat the motion a
Okay.
third time, please.
Restated, okay? Wipe your whiteboards clean for a moment. That this be let me say it as properly as I can. Consider appointing COSA DC representatives to the various boards mentioned in this existing present issue item. That this be carried over to the next meeting at which our staff has stabilized. Because I know that's a moving target. And in the meantime, designate that the board president be the one who designates our representative to be in attendance at those various other board meetings.
I'll ask staff to prepare a listing of anticipated meeting dates.
Yes.
So that we're aware that, hey, we got something coming up, or we got 6 weeks before the next item comes up, and we can go from there.
Okay.
Yes. That's my motion.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have first by Director Barrio, second by Director Gomez. Any discussion?
Public comment?
All those in favor say aye.
Public comment?
Oh.
Public
okay.
comment, yeah.
All right, public comment. It is 10:27. We will open it to public comment. Do we have any public comment? No? All right, 10:27. We will close it for public comment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries.
Mr. President, we've been at this for 2 hours. I'd like to suggest a short, maybe 10-minute recess.
All right, I'll open that to the board. Do we want to recess or do we want to push through? Because obviously this agenda is taking, obviously, longer than most people have anticipated,
Yes.
longer than normal meetings. So
Well-
I'm all good for a recess, but
Well,
I'm
quite
all
frankly,
good for push it through. Do you need a break?
I need a break, and that would break quorum, so I don't think it's really a question.
All right, if you gotta go, you gotta go. All right, we'll take a 10-minute recess. It is 10:28. We'll see y'all back at 10:38. All right, it is 10:38. We could continue on the agenda items. We are on item 5D, presentation by the Coastal DC Bylaws Review Committee and discussion of committee's proposed restated Coastal DC bylaws, presentation by Bylaws Review Committee.
Okay, thank you, Max. You've got me again, folks. I happen to be the only one of the committee of three present today. So as part of your agenda packet, the bylaws red line are kind of the second part of the attachments to that item. And board, we went through this diligently. The committee was made of myself, Dr. Clifton Jones, and Professor Ruben Ceballos. I always stumble over his name like folks stumble over mine. And these red lines were put together by the Coastal DC office staff, Nolan Sosa in particular. This is not intended to be a presentation for approval. It's just to let you all know where we are and to take suggestions if you have anything else you wanted to add to it. The first one on page 2 of the bylaws, section 3, paragraph B, the place for the meetings. There was a conflict between this paragraph and another, so that's a cleanup item in the truest sense of the term. We wanted the two to agree. The verbiage is proposed to be what's in red and underscored. The strikeout indicates what had been and is being removed in accordance with section 3E of these bylaws with proper notice. And it is important to note that all meetings of this board are supposed to occur within the city limits. Let's see, if we continue to section 4, item I, or paragraph I, the authority of the board. The word authority was used in this paragraph twice, and simply as a proper composition thing. The second occurrence was changed from authority to powers. It, in our opinion, doesn't change the impact of the authority of the board's section at all. We move down to paragraph J, continuing in section 4. Under review of proposed development projects, this paragraph had mentioned some partners in economic development, specifically the Cornerstone investors or the San Angelo Chamber of Commerce. And so that this set of bylaws will be more applicable in the future, in the unforeseen future. We are going to be proposing that be changed to outside entities when deemed appropriate by the board of directors. It removes the limitation from 2 to we really can't foresee what partnerships might evolve in 1, 3, 6 months or years down the road. The next is section 6, annual report of the corporate funded projects. The verbiage was not clear. It said, hold a public hearing for review of a summary of the corporate funded projects. Public hearing in the world of government bears a very specific connotation. And what was intended here, we believe, in the original composition of this document was not a public hearing in that legal performance sense, but that it really just be conduct the review that would be open to the public. So it's, again, a simple matter of semantics in the view of the committee. When it does come before the board, we hope you see it the same way. Under Section 7, investment policy. Again, relating to the previous agenda issue that we ended up backing away from concerning the authority of who we get to contract with for services, this paragraph stated Department of Finance of the city, and we are suggesting a change to the entity contracted by the Board of Directors to perform such services. That does not change our intent or anything. At this point, we're still using city services. That's a whole nother topic. But for the purposes of these bylaws, an individual paragraph within it cannot be limiting to what might happen in multiple documents or paragraphs within it, or within this one. So Section 8, expenditures of corporate money. And here we had a bit of renumbering, but essentially inserting for any project as such as defined by the Act, each a product expenditure and collectively project expenditures in the amount of $250,000 or less, the board had sole approval authority over each project expenditure upon approval of the board. For any project expenditure exceeding $250,000, the city council shall also ratify such project expenditure. The corporation shall not make a project expenditure over $250,000 without the approval of the city council. This section shall satisfy the requirement of Texas Local Government Code, Section 501.073, requiring approval of project expenditures by the city council. And it shall also constitute the city council's approval of any necessary budget amendment to carry out said project expenditures. This is modeled after what was legally adopted by the city of Abilene in their bylaws, and we chose to set a limit of $250,000 as compared to Abilene's, I believe it was $500,000, because of the differences between their funding and our funding. The reason for this was something suggested actually in a city council workshop, that why are all these little things being brought to the council? Our executive director a few months ago actually had to take an expenditure of $1,300 for a repair of sheetrock at the BRC before council. That's not the speed of government, or speed of business, that's the speed of government. The water damage repairs really needed to be taken care of. So these monies would not be any kind of expenditure outside of what was already budgeted or approved. It would simply give authority to get the job done. And again, this is a matter of briefing, not something we're going to necessarily debate. So let's move on to Section 2, officers. The secretary and treasurer. First sentence, unchanged, says the secretary of the corporation shall be a city staff member assigned to the corporation under the contract between the corporation and the city of San Angelo as approved by the board of directors. The treasurer of the corporation shall be appointed by, this is the change section, I'm sorry, let me restart. The change being, the treasurer of the corporation shall be appointed by and subject to the control of the board of directors and may be either a board member or an individual assigned under the contract between the corporation and other entity. As an example, the city of San Angelo. The secretary and treasurer of the corporation shall serve indefinite terms unless removed by majority vote of the board of directors. Nothing in this provision shall be construed as conferring upon the Board of Directors authority to terminate the individual's employment by the organization under contract with the corporation. And stricken out of this paragraph is the treasurer of the corporation shall be the finance director of the city of San Angelo and shall serve as long as he or she remains in the position. And again, this is not to usurp any authority from the city council or from our contracted provider of employees on staff. It is just to clarify the difference, that no matter who is providing, the verbiage is stated. We see this as a relatively simple thing. Then section 3, under duties of officers, the president, and it lists duties, we would like to add, except those delegated herein by the executive director. And further down, or the executive director. Again, that's recognizing the existing structure of our staff. Then we come to page 10, Article 5, Executive Director. This we are adding because by some quirk, there had never been mention of, in our bylaws, of having an executive director. Section 1 of this article, appointment of an executive director. Executive director position. The duly appointed Director of Economic Development for the City of San Angelo shall serve as the Executive Director of the corporation. The City Manager shall appoint the Director of Economic Development in consultation with the corporation's Board of Directors. It continues with paragraph B, selection process. As outlined in Article 5, Section 1A, the board shall participate in the selection process when a vacancy arises in the executive director position. The board president or his designee shall serve on the selection panel alongside the city manager and his or her designees. The board president may also appoint up to 2 additional board members to serve on the selection panel. In no event shall more than 3 board members participate in the selection panel for the executive director position, as 4 board members constitutes a quorum under the Texas Open Meetings Act. Section 2, powers and duties of the executive director. A, the executive director shall have the general powers and authorities set forth below so that the executive director may transact the general business of the corporation and effectively carry out the corporation's programs, oversee the administrative functions of the corporation, and otherwise oversee the corporation's affairs. The executive director is authorized to take the following actions. A, make expenditures of corporate funds as set forth in the corporation's annual budget, as such budget is approved by the board and the city council. B, enter into contracts for the purchase of goods and services so long as said contracts do not involve expenditures that exceed the amount set forth in the corporation's annual budget, and the provided expenditures greater than or equal to $50,000 require board approval before the expenditures may be made or obligated under contract. Paragraph C, approve expenditures or contracts that are necessary to little Roman numeral I, or 1, preserve the property of the corporation. 2, address unforeseen damage to corporate machinery, equipment, or other property. 3, preserve and protect the health and safety of the corporation's contracted employees and tenants. Any such expenditure that exceed $50,000 shall require the approval of the board during the next regularly scheduled meeting. In no event shall 90 days elapse without review and approval of such expenditures by the board of directors. D, supervise the corporation's contracted employees and perform any and all duties incident to the City of San Angelo Director of Economic Development position. And the delegated authorities enumerated in this article shall not limit the Executive Director / Director of Economic Development from exercising the authority ordinarily granted to a department director in the City of San Angelo's Employee Policies and Procedures Manual. And then paragraph B, the authority described above shall also authorize the executive director to enter into agreements and/or delivery instruments in the name of and on behalf of the corporation. Said agreements and/or instruments may have provisions for contingent liabilities, provided that the contingent liability obligations are not reasonably expected to exceed the amount set forth in the corporation's annual budget as determined by the executive director in his or her reasonable discretion. And this, in large part, was patterned after other cities, but also consistent with the way this corporation really kind of has been operating. And then Article 6, previously numbered Article 5, is simply a renumeration because of the addition of that long-winded part or article I just read. And then page 14 shows updated signatories toward this end. With that being stated, any additional things that the board thinks the committee should consider before we bring it back to the full board for action? No?
Are there any comments?
Okay.
And I'll just, Dr. Barrett, I'll just clarify. So the insertion of that Article 5 now with the executive director, you're saying that was modeled after the bylaws in Abilene?
Other cities, we compared others.
Okay.
And off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
And you see the state of my notes.
Okay. Okay. So
Some of it's long form, some of it's short.
Okay.
Okay. So that is my presentation. Brandon, do we need any public comment on that?
Yeah, we probably need public comment, and I just wanted to, with leave of the board, before we actually bring this as an action item, I'll probably have some comments and red lines to send you guys, because I wasn't a part of those committees, and I just got this last Wednesday afternoon, so I'd like to give you all some additional feedback, attorney-client
And that does
information.
bring up a point. As a committee duly designated by the president of this board, as a party or a committee of 3 to avoid conflict with the Open Meetings Act, as a committee, has some expectation of confidentiality. Staff was present in the meeting, and the committee did state that in bringing this before the board, just as something open, we're going to talk about what we're doing. Doesn't all need to be behind closed doors. It was specifically stated that we know that we're doing this before it's been reviewed by the attorney. But this is still in the discussion stage. And I am a little alarmed, Mr. Dane, that even though it was discussed, we weren't taking it to the attorney yet. We weren't ready for that. It went almost immediately to the attorney. And I respect that. We were going to seek the input in due time, but there was a violation of the confidentiality of the committee.
Well, I saw this as an agenda item that came up because I get notifications before the agenda is published. And so I saw it as an agenda item, and I asked for any red lines. So I don't think that was anything Mr. Dane did. I asked for that.
The staff participated in the actions of that committee in an advisory capacity. If there was to be any release of confidential information, it should have come from the committee and not by an attending staff. Just a matter of my opinion. I don't mean to keep opening up the wounds from our first agenda issue, but that is something that needed to be said. And that concludes my presentation. Oh, did we need public comment?
Yeah, public comment, it is 10:59. We will open it up to public comment.
Daniel Valenzuela, City Manager for the City of San Angelo. There is an item on there, actually a few of them, but I'll address the one that concerns me the most. And I need some clarification, actually. You're talking about the hiring of the executive director, which is an appointment by the city manager. I do these interviews by committee. I've never interviewed just one person myself. It's usually a committee of 6 individuals. In this case, I've already invited your president to be on that committee as well. But I need clarification because you said in consultation with the board. What exactly does that consultation look like before the hire is made?
This is a presentation of where we are right now, sir.
To consult with the board, what exactly does that, I just want to make sure that I'm clear on that.
I'm not prepared to answer that, simply because this agenda issue is a presentation of where we are right now, not a deliberation or a debate.
Now, I'm not trying to debate it, I'm just trying to find out how you define that.
Which is part of the reason it's being presented as a work in progress, so that everyone who will be involved when it becomes that conversation has a reasonable heads up.
Very good. Well, I am up here just to express concern on that one item, okay? So
I appreciate that.
So that's all I had, really.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And quite frankly, I respect it, and it was anticipated.
Okay.
So I appreciate that you'll be quite ready to have the discussion when the time comes.
I definitely will be, so thank you all, appreciate it.
Thank you. Do we have any additional public comment? Seeing none, we'll close it for public comment. It is 11:01, and then we'll move on to item 5E, discussion of additional efficiency and effectiveness topics, presentation by Michael Dane, Interim Director of Economic Development.
Good morning.
Morning.
Do you have the slides in order? You go back one. All right. Two key items I wanted to report to the board and talk about. One of them has to do with my attendance at Ports to Plains. I met a man named John Osborne, who is CEO of the Lubbock Economic Development Alliance. He said, his comment to me was, we've kind of got a unique shop. You'd be welcome to come have a look and see how we do business. So I did. I visited with Jana Johnston, their CEO and CFO. Really the substance of what their situation is they are a little more autonomous than we are, somewhat consistent with what your bylaws group talked about. Your bylaws group appeared to be interested in some more autonomy, and this group is more like that. Now, there are restrictions in the law, and they have to comply with those also. But that was interesting to hear and see that from them. They appear to have retention and innovation functions. I think that's Brett. Recruitment of new businesses. They have a downtown and special projects function. Workforce development, marketing and communication. They have Visit Lubbock for sales, but for straight sales, but they also have for sporting events, and then they have administrative functions. So in that group, they are separate employees. They do have their own dedicated administrative personnel, but they have their umbrella is a little bigger and catches more functions underneath it. They believe, I went up, I kind of knew they were doing that, and so I expected to hear about savings associated with shared administrative functions. But what surprised me was something I'd already heard from our chamber folks, and that is the cooperation and synergy that comes from being co-located. Our chamber folks have talked recently about some people from the DMO participating in some of their activities, and it yields benefits, and I've actually seen that happen. Yes, sir.
DMO?
I'm
For
sorry.
the sake of everybody else, could you tell us what DMO is?
DMO, it's the CVB, doing business as DMO, Destination Marketing Organization. They are a occupancy tax funded organization that promotes the city of San Angelo.
Thank you, sir.
I've actually seen that. I was in a meeting where I saw that harmony occur, and so I'm in favor of that. So my report to you is that I think there were some interesting elements in how they're organized and how they do business, but we've also heard good things about Abilene and Amarillo, and I think some of what we might see would be consistent with what the subcommittee for bylaws review saw, and we may want to revisit some of those items and open some of those topics up and more fully develop some of those as we move along. And that's it on that visit. Yeah, if you have any questions, I'm trying to keep us moving here. If you have any questions, or if you want to follow up in any way, please give me a holler. All right, this slide. This is just a brief overview of the budget on the economic development side. Remember, we have economic development and we have ballot. So future projects and business plan competition, approximately 1.65 million. Administrative services is down a little in the new budget, and the 220 is not all of it, but that is a number that has come down this year. Recall that is split between the ballot side and the economic development side also. O&M, operating expenditures, there in this slide, there's about $40,000 worth of capital expenditure for furniture and technology that's grouped there. The Chamber of Commerce contract, that's in here at $262,500. While we have not approved that is farther down in the agenda, and the amount they proposed is $262,500. And that brings us around to personnel. And we have 4 Coastal DC staff members. And when we heard discussion earlier about the city services contract, that was a grouping of your personnel and administrative services for both the economic development and the ballot side. So the number is 7 something. It's a large number. The biggest piece of that is personnel and obviously admin services. So, with that orientation in mind, could you move us to the next slide, please? This is a grouping of cities. This grouping is cities that are approximately our population and that are approximately in our location. You can see on the, first of all, the white bar indicates, the line indicates revenue levels. And the blue bars indicate staffing levels. So in the way of orientation, the revenue for the city of San Angelo on the far left for economic development only is approximately $2.9 million. And the staffing level is 4, or if you include approximately 63% of the chamber contract revenue, that would be 1.25. If you include them both, then it's 6. But in our discussions in preparation for the renewal of the chamber contract, Walt said, you're funding approximately 63 or 61% of the revenue in that function.
That's correct, about 63%.
And so if you take 2 positions, 63% of that's really 1.25. And so I think that's important because you are funding that. Whether you include it or not in the analysis is up to you. This is just information. But this is how this looks compared to these cities. I think it's really a difficult comparison because they have so much more revenue than we have. On this slide, the average revenue without the city is approximately 11.5 million, which is approximately 4 times what we have. The number of personnel average is 4.85, or approximately 5. Because of the, would you go back, please? Thank you. Because of the wide variation in the number of personnel, if you throw out the high and the low, your average is 4.4 people. And so in this slide, you can see we're in the ballpark for the number of people compared to these cities. But we have 1/4, on average, 1/4 of the revenue available. Of course, that's rooted in that ballot split. Remember the 72-28. So if you take the city closest to us on this slide, Edinburgh, 4 people. We have 4 people plus the 1.25. But they have more than twice the revenue that we have. That is the nature of our difficulty, is that revenue restriction. And this presentation is designed to point out that while we may be staffing consistent with these organizations, we don't have the resources they have. So I think these are names we recognize across the bottom of the slide, but it's difficult to make the comparison. I think we need to choose organizations which have economic development funding more consistent with what we have and make that comparison. And that is the next slide, would you please? And so you see names here you may or may not recognize. They are much smaller. Same format of the slide. Looking at the left, Sulphur Springs, approximately 1.5 or 1.6 million is their revenue, and they have 3 employees. And so that works all the way across on that slide. And you can see San Angelo falls a little closer to the middle. These are sorted by revenue amounts. And so the average revenue, not including San Angelo on this slide, is approximately $3.77 million per year. Again, there's some variability here. Wide range, ranges from 1.5 to 7 million. If you throw out the high and the low, the average is 3.68. So the high-low thing didn't make too much difference. Somewhat consistent, about 30% more than the city of San Angelo has, the average. When you look at the number of bodies, the average, 3.16. If you throw out the high-low, 3.1. So approximately 3 bodies. You could go 3.25. But again, given the level of revenue we have, we seem to be supporting a lot of salaries. And so this is designed to be the beginning of a conversation. This is not the answer. Nobody's trying to say what the answer is, but it is an observation that given, whether you look at the previous slide, we're way low on revenue and we're in the ballpark for bodies, or here where you've sorted these according to revenue, we're on the high end for the number of bodies. So as supplemental information, where did these numbers come from? The Texas Economic Development Council gives awards each year related to submissions produced by economic development corporations. If you score a certain number of points, you would be eligible for one of their certificates. We went through this exercise before Guy left, and so Guy and Nolan, I think Nolan did the work, filled out one of their applications, and we scored enough points to be eligible. We just did it after the deadline. But I have no doubt that we would have received that and been part of this group of cities. The question posed to me was, of high-performing economic development corporations, how does our staffing level relate? So these are all cities that have received recognition from the Texas Economic Development Council, and that's why they were included. And this group specifically is a subset of that who are in our range for revenue. And so I'm not asking for any action, just reporting to you these findings. I think earlier somebody asked, did the city look at staffing levels across the organization? We did. And Mr. Valenzuela is visiting with another department about their staffing levels. So,
Help me understand, visiting with one other department?
there was another department identified that Mr. Valenzuela selected.
Identified as?
Having having more employees than the norm based on, just based on a straight comparison. It's, again,
Okay.
the beginning of a conversation. He has begun that conversation with that other department.
Okay.
So this was not a Cosa DC only thing.
There's economy in size.
Pardon me?
There is economy in size. A company with 10 employees, well, I'll go back to a very elementary comparison, a story I heard many years ago. There was once a competition, a bunch of guys on an old west street, a couple horses out there, I believe they were Clydesdales. And how much could each one pull? Who's got the stronger horse? And they pulled, and they had a competition, and it was impressive what they could pull. But somebody raised the question, let's wager, how much can they pull together? So when they harnessed the two Clydesdales on one yoke and put it together, and they kept adding, I suppose, beer barrels to the beer wagon, because that's what Clydesdales were used for. Two did not produce more than the sum of the two individuals. Two produced, and I believe the figure was 4 or 5 times as much as one could pull alone. I think I heard you mention that there were a lot of variables in this. I couldn't keep up with them. We are in the midst of an initiative of economic development. It seems foolish to me at this point to want to cut staff when it seems there are so many variables that this isn't really an empirical measure. Empirical measure being something scientific.
Mr. Vice President, if I may, I think it's important to frame this discussion a little more appropriately. As a matter of public record, it's important that I clarify that this is not an apples-to-apples comparison, and I'm not certain who prepared it, but I'll return to the previous slide. The total revenue line, ignoring the misspelling of the word revenue for a moment, we have $2.8 million. That is not the total revenue for San Angelo Economic Development Corporation reported to the comptroller. And while I can appreciate that this number is the number that we're homing in on as the number, the revenue brought in is 28%, that is not an accurate apples-to-apples comparison. The revenue number is above $10 million a year. The city retains that 72%, roughly over $7 million a year. So I think we should frame that more appropriately, because these discussions that center around bodies, as they've been deemed this morning, are not bodies. They're livelihoods. They are people. They are people. And I think it is irresponsible to frame it any other way. It is important that we remember, for a matter of public record, that we do bring in over $10 million a year in revenue, and that we partner very closely, hand in hand with the city, on their initiatives, their ballot initiatives, which are critical to the development of water infrastructure, affordable housing, the development of facilities, of parks that the public enjoy on a daily basis. Without that 72%, which we participate hand in hand with the city to administer, we would not accomplish the objectives that we've accomplished. And so to disregard that in any analysis is reckless. It is irresponsible. And I apologize for just a moment for breaking decorum. I do. I apologize to this board. But it is important for me to clarify to this board that we are in the midst, and I can speak on this topic authoritatively, because I have completed doctoral education in human resource development and organizational change. So, members of my board, this is an expert opinion. I am published internationally in international journals on the topic of human resource development and organizational change. I'm regarded as an expert in municipal succession planning. I want to give you that rundown of my qualifications before I make this statement. There is not an employer right now, who is looking at their staffing from the perspective of how do we reduce, how do we do away with. At this point, the city just reported during their August 11th budget workshop that they're at 80% vacant. The priority, from my perspective as a member of the public and as administrator of this corporation, is that we look at this responsibly. This analysis is nothing short of offensive. Nothing short of offensive. I don't know where to go beyond that, but it does not paint an accurate picture, and to not clarify that for this board would be concerning to me. I don't know if I can let that continue.
I had noticed.
Let me point out that the staff spends very little time on the 72%. They spend the bulk of their time on the economic development side.
Okay, and I think that's a very good comparison. Wasn't it Abilene that recently landed a huge contract that was, or a huge business prospect that was about a $33 million deal? One of the cities, which kind of brings to mind, and who it was and how much it was really isn't relevant. But, well, it's relevant in concept. A measure by the number of contacts, contracts, interactions, the actual time investment, be it a $25,000 deal or a $25 million deal, pretty much takes the same amount of labor. And I do believe it's Abilene that I'm...
It is Abilene. The project you're referencing is the Great Lakes Cheese Project, which
thank you.
There's that cheese triangle between Lubbock, Amarillo, and Abilene.
Generally speaking, it's easier to make things 10 at a time than 1 at a time. So if you land a $33 million deal, the staffing required to pull that together is pretty close to the same that it took to help a small coffee company in San Angelo.
It also helps to have the size of the tranche of money that an Abilene or a Lubbock or even an Amarillo.
I have to agree with that.
So I would argue, and again, this is from a staffing perspective, that it is much more difficult for us to attract and retain companies being so isolated. We don't have the benefit of being co-located with an Addison, an Arlington, a McKinney, a Dallas, a Fort Worth, where we can market the workforce of the Metroplex. Or we don't even have the Lubbock or the Abilene where we can market 3 universities or the Texas Tech giant. San Angelo is already kind of hamstrung with respect to the ballot division. So that's one handicap that we face. And then our isolation and our limited infrastructure and capacity to produce a workforce, our employment rate, which falls well below the state and national average, are all factors that contribute to considerable difficulty in recruiting companies. And I would also note that the high-performing organizations listed here as having received the Economic Excellence Award, it's important that we clarify that the Economic Excellence Award is an award that recognizes those organizations who a certain percentage of board members and staff members have completed basic economic development training or attended a Texas Economic Development Conference within the last 12 months. That is not an indicator of the performance of a half-cent sales tax corporation. Nothing could be further from. I would argue that the performance of a half-cent sales tax corporation is evidenced by the outcomes, the actual outcomes of direct economic investment infused into the local economy, like a $170 million investment that occurred with zero incentive dollars paid out by this corporation with respect to the Korean Midland Power Company. That was heavy lifting done by Michael Looney, but done in close consultation with this corporation. One analysis that is glaringly absent from this presentation is actual outcomes that economic development corporations are measured by. It's important that we frame that discussion appropriately, especially as it pertains to a staffing discussion.
I appreciate that, Nolan, and I certainly personally appreciate the level of education and the credentials you just mentioned. It's a privilege to have such fine people on our staff. And that goes for Bob Schneeman and Nora Navarez as well. But that being said, Michael, the engineer in me is coming out, and I'm thinking we forgot to put landing gear on the airplane.
Well, regardless of what colorful expressions you choose, it remains that these are the organizations in the study that we have comparable revenues to, and there's no denying we have more employees than they do, and that is it. Those are facts, and it's just the beginning of a conversation. If you feel like we're staffed appropriately, then this can move on. But if you feel like this is an opportunity to begin a conversation, so be it. So,
I think this is a good starting point. And the future conversation is going to have to really look at how we arrive at certain conclusions. Thank you for the presentation. Not to take charge here.
Do we have any? We were in public comment, weren't we? Or we have not? Okay. Do we need to move to public comment? Or is that all for the presentation?
Pardon me?
Was that the end of your presentation?
That's it. Just an opening, and if the board has direction.
Okay. Any conversation, feedback from the board? No? All right. Public comment? Okay. 11:26, is there any public comment on this topic?
Daniel Vanso, City Manager. Nolan, you're absolutely right. We're talking about people. This is not an easy thing. I had a meeting with the director as well that when we took a look at all the city and all the city departments, I had a meeting with a director that was very uncomfortable because I care a lot about that staff. And so we get that. We understand that we're dealing with lives. But we also know that fiscal responsibility falls on us, and we have to do everything we possibly can to leverage the revenues that come in. And when we look at something like this, trust me, it's not something that we're thinking of crassly, that we think that these are just bodies. They're not. We need to make sure that on our end that we do what's fiscally responsible and making sure that we do have the proper staffing. And you said it too a while ago, Mr. Barrio. It should reflect on the performance as well. What exactly are we getting from the services that we currently get from COSA DC and the contract that we have with the Chamber as well? What is that impact and how are we doing? I mean, the proof is in the pudding. You have to look at what exactly it is that's been accomplished, and that's something that we'll take into consideration as well. But the truth is, when you look at numbers, when you look at revenues, and actual revenues that can be used for economic development, it's not, unfortunately, it's not the 100%. I wish it was a 100%. It's a lower number, it's 28%. And that's what Michael is presenting here as well. Again, I just wanted to make sure that I express from my point that when we look at RIFs, reduction in force, right sizing, it's important that we take into consideration those individuals as well. And we never look at it from the perspective of they're gone. What can we do with these individuals as well? How can we fit them into the organization where they can be really effective as well, rather than maybe that we're have too many employees in one department, and there's just not enough to do. We want to make sure that on our end, we're being efficient across the board. So again, this wasn't just a view of just this one department. It's a view of all the different departments. So I am working on another one. I never want anybody to believe that we're just picking on this one. We're not. So anyway, this is just what I wanted to state.
I don't want to make this a conversation. This is your public comment, period. We'll have the conversation later.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comment? All right, seeing none, it is 11:29. We will close it for public comment and move on to the next agenda item, which is 5F. Update regarding the Economic Development Director position and search process, presentation by Michael Dane.
Thank you. We have accepted applications, and we are ready to schedule first round of interviews. That would have already happened, but our admin assistant has been out with COVID. She's back, and so I'll speak with her about getting those scheduled. And Max, I think she'll be calling you.
Okay. Cool. So just to clarify, just for my sake, so will I, as representative of Coastal DC, be involved on all of the interviews, or how's that going to work?
I think Daniel has said that on the past, I think the last time we hired, I think we had the treasurer, me, Daniel, and I think whoever was president at that time. He has talked about involving you and the mayor and himself and me and possibly the treasurer, depending on how many he wants on the panel.
Okay. And that would be for all of the interviews that are being conducted, right? Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, all the interviews. Yeah. Right now, we're anticipating 4.
4?
4.
Okay. Can you share, or are you able to share how many applications we've received?
10 to 12. Okay. I don't know that exact number, okay, but it's in that neighborhood.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Feedback? Okay. Appreciate the update.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, guess we can move on to letter G, or do we need any public comment on that, Brandon, or? Public comment? Yeah. Okay, we'll do public comment, 11:31 on item F, if there is any. All right, seeing none, we'll close it for public comment, 11:32, and we'll move on to item G. Discussion and possible action regarding the professional service agreement by and between the City of San Angelo Development Corporation and the San Angelo Chamber of Commerce. Presentation by Michael Dane.
Good morning. We have been talking about the agreement with the Chamber of Commerce for professional services. They have proposed an amount which is consistent with last year. That amount, some years back, we started at $225,000. And if you escalated that based on CPI, it would, I believe, exceed what they have proposed now. So from that standpoint, the value is reasonable. I have heard positive comments about their performance. And my understanding is the board doesn't have any complaints. If you decide to move forward with the contract, the proposal is consistent with what has been approved in the past. The only question I would have would be if you think that the review of other organizations or the staffing levels would enter into your consideration of the contract, then I would suggest we table it. But if those things don't enter into your position on contract approval, it is, this agenda item is ready for your approval.
All right. Do you have any comments from the board?
Just with regard to consideration on staffing levels, if we were to use a metric that included the 2 economic developers with the chamber in our staffing level count, then I simply ask of the city, are you also including all the employees of Reese Albert in the public works projects?
I'm not aware of us reporting staffing levels on public works projects.
exactly my point. Why would you include any contractors? The contract is about the accomplishment of a task. How many employees they have. Those two economic developers are not part of our head count. So I don't see that as an open item. And I'd like to make a motion that we approve the contract.
Second.
Okay, we have a first by Director Barrios, second by Director Spano. Do we have any feedback, discussion? No? All right, do we need to do public comment? I saw that. I'll get it right, even though it's the last agenda item. All right, we'll open it up to public comment. It is 11:34. Is there any public item on this discussion, or discussion on this item? Need more coffee. All right, seeing none, we will close it for public comment. It is still 11:34. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, and we will move it to closed session. It is 11:34. And executive session under the provision of Government Code Title V, Open Government Ethics, Subtitle A, Open Government Chapter 551, Open Meetings Subchapter D. Exceptions to requirement that meetings be open under the following sections. A, Section 551.087 to discuss or deliberate commercial or financial information that the board received from a business prospect and to deliberate the offer of a related financial or other incentive concerning project, connector, manufacturer, or other miscellaneous manufacturing connectivity components. All right, we are now in closed session. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Go right ahead.
Are we ready to go?
Still have closed session on the screen. I wouldn't start it.
Yeah. All right, testing. We're good? Okay. So we are back from closed session. It is 12:06. And we'll go follow up at administrative issues. Item A, consideration and possible action of items discussed in closed session if needed, and there are none. So we'll move on to B, announcements and consideration of future agenda items. Do we have any?
Just the items that were previously mentioned during the individual issue discussions. Administrative, bylaws. I've lost my list. I closed my book already.
I'll follow up with you, John, I'll make sure that.
Pardon?
I'll make sure we're on the same page about what you want on the agenda.
Okay,
Yeah, cool.
that sounds good.
All right. Well, seeing no additional, number 8, we'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I'll make that motion.
First by Director Barrio and second
Second.
by Director Gomez. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. It is 12:07. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.